Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk, the second hour of this Tuesday edition of Focal Point on the American Family Radio Talk Network. Focal Point is the program. I am your amiable, congenial, and convivial host, Brian Fisher. Let's go right back to the phones. Had a couple of callers waiting patiently, so let's grab them, start this second hour. Let's go to Mark in Leesburg, Virginia. Mark, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian. First of all, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the representatives that were injecting Bible verses into their left-wing ideology when you played Wrangell and Sheila Jackson Lee.
Yeah.
And it's really stunning to me that they kind of cherry-pick their Bible verses and try to twist and distort those to fit their agenda. Yet, on the flip side of that coin, you won't hear one of those types ever quote the Bible when it comes to something, for instance, as abortion or same-sex marriage or what's the other thing I was thinking about? Capital punishment. I mean, all these things are clearly defined in the Bible through and through, yet they support the opposite. And you won't hear them stand up and quote a Bible verse about that, but they'll go ahead and try to twist a Bible verse about taking money out of the hands of people that are working hard for a living and giving it to people who, a lot of them, not all of them, aren't even willing to support themselves. And they're just following in the footsteps of Barack Obama when, I don't know if you remember this, a few years ago, he got up on TV and he started talking about, for those who have been given more, much more would be required. And he was talking about taxing the rich or the wealthy even more to support government, when we know that that is not what Jesus was talking about. That's not what that had to do with. That was dealing with sin and knowledge. And as far as once you've been taught the truth, and yet you continue to sin, more will be required from you, but it will be required in the sense that you will be punished for your behavior after receiving the knowledge of the truth. And I just wanted to say that because it just frustrates me to no end to hear them when they get up and talk about the Bible, when they want to give other people's money away or promote something that is anti-biblical.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, very good. All right, Mark, that's a great call. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Jesus talked about the Pharisees of his day. They did the same thing. He said that this people honors me with their lips, but with their words, but their hearts are far from me. And he rebuked them and said, you've got a fine way of setting aside the commandment of God in order to honor the tradition of men. This is exactly what it says. You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. That's what the Pharisees did in Jesus' day. That's what liberals are doing in our day. They've got their tradition, socialism, big government. Government does everything. Government is God. Can't live without government. Remember the soundbite we played yesterday? President Obama, government's in everything. Government's relevant to everything. Can't do anything without government. Government's got to be there in every single facet and part of life. I mean, that's their view. Government to them is God. They worship at the altar of government. They do not worship at the altar of God. They worship at the altar of government. Government is the one thing without which we cannot do. We must have government. It must be at the center of our lives. We must depend upon government. We must look to government with every need that we have. Well, that's what we look to God for. But for liberals, government is God. So good call. Thank you, Mark, for that. Let's go to David in Newton, Texas. David, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Hello.
David, go right ahead.
Yes. Thanks for taking my call. I enjoy your program so much, and I'll get right to it.
Thank you.
I saw a friend of mine here that I worked with for about 20 years, and we live in a town of about 7,500, and we got to talking about old times, and then we got to talking about taxes and the government, and then we talked about food stamps. And he told me that in the area that he lives in the city, that the day that people get food stamps, he can drive down the street for 3 or 4 blocks, and there'll be 4 to 6 people out standing on the street wanting to sell their food stamps for $20. And he said that he wouldn't do it, that he makes them go to the store and get, $100 worth of food with their food stamps and then bring it out to the truck, and he gives them $20 for it. But if that is so prevalent in a city of 7,500, in a 3 or 4 block area, how bad is it all over the United States?
Yeah. Well, and you got a great point, David. And again, I'm not saying everybody's committing fraud on the food stamp program or welfare program, but it is absolutely ripe for fraud. I've had stories, you remember these stories, we've been over them, where you've got these convenience store owners. They will buy these EBT cards from customers at 20 cents on the dollar, whatever. And then they'll go to supermarkets and they'll restock their convenience stores using the balance that's left on these food stamp cards. So they're using food stamps to stock their convenience stores. Well, obviously, if you have people that are willing to sell their EBT cards, they don't need the EBT cards to eat. They've got some other way to eat. So they're using it as a cash cow, put some money in their pockets. And then these convenience store owners are using money that's been taken from us involuntarily against our will to give to poor people. They wind up putting it in their pockets and use it to run their own businesses. We've had these stories about how people are taking their EBT cards down, they're buying food in bulk, and they're shipping it to the Caribbean in these big, giant 55-gallon drums. So you got a black market so that they'll ship it off to the Caribbean, and there it will be sold on the street, black market exchange in foodstuffs, and they're making a killing off of this because they don't have to spend a dime of their own money on the food. And so it's just virtually pure profit after they pay the shipping costs to get it there. You've got story after story of people with multiple EBT cards using fake aliases, using different versions of their own name, using their full name with a middle initial, then using their first initial and their middle name, and then using the initials of their first and middle name with their last name. So they get 3 EBT cards just like that. Then they'll use other people's identity. So the capacity for welfare fraud here is just off the charts. Anything else you want to add, David?
Well, I heard here a little while back that there were 100 million Americans getting some type of food subsistence.
That is correct. There are more Americans that are getting some kind of assistance from the government than are working to support them. It's unsustainable.
Well, we know what that leads to. Sounds like ancient Rome.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's exactly where we're headed. I had a piece by Victor Davis Hanson, who's a really smart fella, and he made that point that we are resembling Rome more and more every day. Everything in ancient Rome at the end was about bread and circuses. Yeah. It was about going to the government for food and then going to the government or some source for entertainment. Their life revolved around food at taxpayer expense and entertainment. Just like we get our food stamps, we go buy Fig Newtons, we buy Hostess Twinkies, we sit down and watch our cable television.
One other thing, whenever Rome was invaded, the invaders had to go in the Senate and wake the senators up to tell them they had been invaded.
Yeah. All right, David, I appreciate it. Woke up and it had happened. That's what's happening to us. Focal Point AFR Talk. Back with Steve Lonigan after the break.